Greetings, everyone. Welcome back. Thank you for your participation. We have a new narrative to present to you. Let us commence. Greetings, my name is Jack, and today I wish to discuss a matter that nearly jeopardized my marriage but ultimately transformed my perspective on partnerships indefinitely. My spouse, Laura, and I have been wed for several years. Similar to many couples, we have experienced fluctuations in our relationship. Nonetheless, I eventually discerned a recurring pattern that I regret not identifying earlier. Whenever Laura did not achieve her desired outcome, she would become emotionally withdrawn. She refrained from arguing, explaining, or explicitly stating her grievances. Conversely, she employed an other approach. She would refrain from intimacy. Initially, I regarded it with little significance. I presumed it was really a matter of mood, or perhaps she required solitude. However, the more I observed, the more I determined that it was not coincidental. It was computed. When I declined her requests, whether they pertained to a favor, a decision, or a mere disagreement, she abruptly lost interest. It extended beyond mere physical connection. She would behave aloof, indifferent, and frigid. Initially, I acquiesced because, really, who desires to contend with such tension within their own residence? I attempt to rectify situations, provide her with reassurance, and occasionally alter my perspective to restore normalcy. What do you suppose? It was consistently effective. Once she attained her desires, she would exhibit tenderness once more, as though nothing had transpired. Upon reflection, I can discern precisely what transpired. Laura discovered that she could manage the issue without elevating her voice, engaging in disputes, or making repeated requests. Her sole task was to instill in me the sensation of impending loss. For an extended while, I acquiesced to it. I allowed myself to believe that fulfilling her desires would lead to our happiness. This moment was distinct, since I ultimately arrived at a realization. I grew weary of the necessity to earn my wife's affection, and I resolved to cease participating in that dynamic. I recall the final incident that precipitated the collapse. Laura had been discussing a limited edition designer purse for weeks, an exorbitantly priced item that she deemed essential. It was not merely a desire. She conveyed it as though it were something she merited. I refrained from disputing the matter with her. I recognized that everyone appreciates fine possessions, and I never hesitated to indulge my wife when possible. Her approach, perceiving it as an expectation rather than a request, was off-putting to me. One evening, she raised the topic once more. We were seated in the living room, and she displayed the bag on her phone for what seemed like the 100th occasion. My birthday is approaching. This is the item I desire. Her voice lacked enthusiasm or optimism. It seemed resolute, as if she were finalizing an agreement. I observed the pricing. It was not unfeasible, yet it was not a sum I could expend frivolously. Laura, I understand your desire, and I will procure it for you. I informed her that it was not an appropriate time. I maintained a neutral tone, ensuring I did not appear disdainful. I deemed it a rational response. I was not declining. I was merely indicating that it is not yet time. To Laura, not yet equated to never. Her countenance altered immediately. She emitted a theatrical sigh and flung her phone onto the couch. Subsequently, the silent treatment ensued. I could almost perceive the mechanisms in her mind, assessing how she would exact retribution for my failure to promptly fulfill her desires. At that moment, she ultimately lost her composure. Your assertion of "not now" implies significance. I nonchalantly shrugged, maintaining my composure. Shortly, Laura. I must attend to several other matters initially. That was insufficient for her. Disregard it, she said, rising and proceeding to the bedroom. I remained seated for some time, gazing at the unlit television screen, contemplating how we arrived at this juncture, when every dialogue evolved into a conflict and compromise transformed into domination. At the time, I did not consider it significant, but in retrospect, it was the initial indication of what was to follow. That evening, following my customary ritual, I nestled into bed next her. Typically, I would embrace her or draw her near, nothing significant. A fundamental, instinctive activity engaged in by couples. But the second my arm touched her, she drew away. "Refrain," she stated bluntly. I blinked, perplexed. "What is the inquiry?" She clarified that she was not in the mood for anything, as though I had just made an unacceptable advance. I had not even commenced anything beyond a mere touch. This was a deliberate response. This constituted punishment. "I merely wish to embrace you," I stated, my tone composed yet resolute. "I do not wish for you to hold me," she responded, averting her gaze. I reclined, gazing at the ceiling, sensing an inward transformation. I had observed this trend previously, each time I resisted her demands. She retracted her adoration. Each disagreement resulted in aloofness, silent treatments, and ultimately, explicit rejection. Each time, I was the one to extend an apology and reconcile, facilitating a return to normalcy. However, on this occasion, I would not feign ignorance of its true nature. I had no intention of pleading for affection like a misbehaving child. This was deliberate, and for the first time, I made a decision that would alter everything. I had no intention of continuing to play this game. Rather than expending my energy on seeking her attention, I redirected that energy towards self-improvement. In the subsequent days, I began to occupy my time with activities I had previously cherished but had abandoned. I retrieved the guitar that had been gathering dust in the corner. I resumed reading the novels I had previously abandoned halfway through. I resumed exercising, not to impress Laura, but because it was gratifying to engage in an activity for my own benefit. If she preferred not to converse with me, so be it. If she preferred not to be in my presence, so be it. I had no intention of pursuing her. For the first time in an extended period, I was not endeavoring to rectify matters. I was merely allowing circumstances to unfold. The transition occurred organically. I had devoted my attention to an individual who provided only the bare minimum when it was convenient for her. Consequently, when her friends visited, I spoke myself freely. I remained the same charming, humorous, and fascinating individual I had always been, but now I was not confining that energy solely to Laura. When her friends visited, I ensured my active participation in the conversation rather than remaining a passive observer as I had previously. If one of them acquired a new hairstyle, I observed and praised them. Upon hearing a joke, I laughed and contributed to the amusement. I established eye contact. I attentively listened to their discourse, affirming by nods, responding, and posing subsequent inquiries. "Are you aware of this?" They replied. They found my jokes amusing. They initiated discussions with me and sincerely appreciated my presence. I ceased to linger near Laura during social occasions. I became the focal point of attention in my own capacity. I was not excessive in my actions. I was in attendance. I ensured individuals feel acknowledged and valued, resulting in their attraction to me. Laura observed. She was unaccustomed to observing me in this manner, so relaxed and so easily captivating. She was unaccustomed to my failure to seek her out, to look for her approval, or to await her reacceptance into her favor. For the first time in an extended period, I was not the one pursuing her. I was simply being authentic, and unexpectedly, that persona became highly sought for. Laura had consistently exhibited confidence in her capacity to manage the problem. I redirected my energies, and it soon became apparent to her. Initially, I discerned that she was not really worried. She likely believed I was merely brooding, anticipating her determination of when I would be deserving of her adoration once more. However, when witnessing her seamless connection with her pals, a transformation occurred. I was not attentive to her. Her acquaintances observed as well. They began to hover around me more frequently, making jokes and engaging me in chats. Several of them contacted me personally, rather than communicating through Laura as they previously had. That, more than anything else, surprised Laura. One evening, we attended a modest gathering at a mutual friend's residence. Jessica, a longtime acquaintance of Laura, laughed excessively at one of my jokes and playfully caressed my arm. It was not a significant matter, yet it was sufficient to cause Laura to get tense. When another friend, Sophia, smiled and inquired, "Why is your husband so entertaining?" I feel as though I am unfamiliar with this aspect of him. Although she remained silent, she was now observing with great attentiveness. The situation deteriorated from that point forth. Another acquaintance, Kate, teasingly poked Laura and remarked, "If you ever tire of him, direct him my way." Although she was evidently jesting, Laura did not find it amusing. In the ensuing days, Laura grew increasingly perceptive. I observed her scrutinizing me at social gatherings, her gaze analyzing my interactions as if she sought to dissect every word, smile, and laugh. One evening, I entered the bedroom to retrieve an item and discovered her seated on the side of the bed, holding my phone. Initially, she did not perceive my entrance. Upon noticing my presence, she promptly set the phone down as if she had not been perusing it moments earlier. The amusing aspect was that there was nothing to discover. I had not committed any wrongdoing. Her inclination to verify conveyed all the information I required. She was aware that she was losing her grasp. Her displeasure escalated from that point onward. The more she endeavored to uncover something dubious, the more it exasperated her that she could not. I did not engage in cheating. I was not covertly moving about. That realization was consuming her. Upon returning home from work one evening, I observed that she was attired differently. In lieu of her customary sweatpants and large t-shirt, she donned a fitting dress that accentuated her figure flawlessly, her hair styled nicely, and her makeup applied subtly. She was not departing. Although she was at home, it was evident that she desired to be noticed. Subsequently, the dialogues commenced. Suddenly, she began to engage with me once more, inquiring about my day, laughing at previously overlooked remarks, and interspersing praises throughout our interactions. "You have appeared particularly well lately," she remarked while arranging the supper table. I only nodded and expressed my gratitude, maintaining a nonchalant demeanor. Previously, I would have perceived that as an invitation to reconnect, but not on this occasion. I was aware of the situation. She was probing to determine if I would succumb to the same pattern in which she controlled the timing of my attention. Subsequently, after a prolonged absence, Mom resumed preparing my preferred dishes. Initially, I perceived it as a coincidence, however, following the third occurrence within a week, it became evident. Laura was not the kind of individual to abruptly transform into a devoted spouse without justification. Previously, she engaged in such actions solely when she sought a reciprocal benefit. However, I did not engage. I continued to converse with her, remained seated at the dinner table, and reacted when she addressed me. However, I no longer exhibited desperation for her adoration, and for the first time, she appeared to experience the inverse of the push-and-pull dynamic she had established. My attention was no longer subject to her demands. It was a privilege she had to get. She exerted greater effort. She chuckled at my jokes, including those that lacked humor. However, I perceived the entirety of the situation. She sought a response to elicit my recognition of her efforts, so restoring her sense of control. However, I maintained my position. For the first time, I discerned that she was the one experiencing uncertainty. One day, while seated in the living room and perusing my phone, she entered and positioned herself before me. She expressed her nostalgia for the past. Her voice was subdued, yet I recognized the anticipation underlying it. I set my phone aside and gazed at her. I remained silent and waited. She inhaled, her fingers fluttering as if she were grappling to articulate her thoughts. I perceive a sense of distance between us. I maintained a neutral expression, remaining silent. I sought to ascertain her intended direction with this matter. Ultimately, she positioned herself next to me, her shoulders rigid. "May we converse?" That was all. That was the pivotal time. The anticipated moment has arrived. She ultimately recognized that something was off, having engaged in a game for an excessive duration and lost control over it. I had no intention of gloating. I just required to be candid. I exhaled audibly, inclining my torso and placing my arms upon my knees. "I profess my love for you, Laura," I stated, my tone composed and unwavering, although I am finished with frivolous antics. She gazed at me, her face unreadable, but I could tell she was listening, truly listening. "Affection must be genuine," I asserted, rather than a mere exchange for personal gain. "That does not constitute love. That constitutes control. I will no longer engage in that activity." She parted her lips as if intending to dispute, yet no words emerged. Instead, she averted her gaze, her fingers entwined in her lap. "This marriage does not pertain to control," I stated, my tone now gentler yet still resolute. "To achieve mutual happiness, we must cease regarding one another as rivals. I am not your adversary, Laura. I was never." The room was enveloped in silence. For the first time in an extended period, we were not assuming roles. We were not navigating around one another, anticipating the subsequent action of the other party. We were merely two individuals occupying the same area, confronting the reality. She nodded slowly, exhaling as if she had been retaining her breath for days. "I understand you," she murmured. For the first time in an extended period, I placed my trust in her. I noted the alterations in Laura's conduct. She was not merely donning an attractive clothing or preparing my preferred meal to ingratiate herself with me. She was genuinely making an effort. I initially observed it in the minutiae. She inquired about my day, not merely as a courtesy, but because she genuinely desired to know. She ceased rolling her eyes when I declined a request. Instead, she inquired about the reason and genuinely contemplated my response. It was distinct. I genuinely valued it. However, I did not hasten to meet her halfway on this occasion. That version of myself is in the past. I had acquired knowledge from my experience. Love should not resemble a trade, and I refuse to engage in that dynamic anymore. For the marriage to succeed, it must be founded on mutual respect rather than her determining my worthiness of attachment. I allowed her to undertake the task, not from spite, but to ascertain her sincerity. Indeed, she was. She no longer employed closeness as a weapon. She did not reject me when her desires were unfulfilled. She ultimately comprehended that our relationship was not centered on control, but rather on partnership. The most significant transformation occurred within myself, rather than in her. I learned to appreciate my self-worth and to acknowledge that I merit a marriage in which I do not have to plead for fundamental love and respect. I cherished Laura and had no desire to depart. However, I also declined to be exploited once more. Consequently, by establishing that boundary and steadfastly adhering to it, our marriage improved significantly. It was not flawless, as no relationship is. However, it was authentic. No further games. No further penalties. Two individuals who have ultimately mastered the art of loving one another appropriately. Advocating for myself was the most advantageous decision I have ever taken. I am not asserting that this is a universal solution. Each connection is unique. However, if you find yourself in a circumstance where an individual perpetually dangles affection as a reward, contemplate whether this is genuine love or mere manipulation. If someone genuinely loves you, they will not regard closeness as a reward contingent upon your compliance with their desires. What are your opinions? Have you ever encountered a situation of this nature? Do you believe I managed the situation appropriately, or would you have approached it differently? Please leave a remark below. I would appreciate your insights.